This is the Khmer Times News. My name is Paolo Bornini, and these are your headlines. Bird flu is back and it's deadlier than ever. The abandoned skyscrapers of Sihanoukville could become a huge financial burden, and debt is at an all-time high at nearly double the national GDP. But first, our main headline. Remember that thing called bird flu that was named H5N1 variant? Well, it's back. And what is terrifying is this strain has a 60% kill rate. And this is the first death in decades. It has killed one girl here in Cambodia, and she was just 12 years old. It all started with the mysterious deaths of many wild animals near the girl's village, but it was not long until people themselves were struck down. The biggest fear now is this going to rampage across the nation as COVID-19 did and leave in its wake not only death, but also yet more economic turmoil?
According to a statement from the ministry, the girl fell sick in mid-February with symptoms such as coughing and a sore throat. But the symptoms got more severe and she was sent to a natural paediatric hospital in Phnom Penh. But sadly, she passed away at the hospital the very next day. And coincidentally, it was that very same day that the lab test results came back, and they confirmed that she was in fact H5N1 positive. A statement has now been released saying that an abnormal number of dead wild animals were found near the place where the infected girl lived, and samples from those dead animals have been taken for lab testing at the ministry, and they are awaiting the results. And this tragedy marks the first case of death from bird flu since 2014, and is only the 57th case within the kingdom. But here is the scary bit. According to the World Health Organization, human cases of H5N1 are at current rare. But when people do get infected, the mortality rate is about 60%. Now that is one sentence that is truly horrifying, for it means that you are more likely to die than to survive. And from the latest reports we have had, it only amplifies the tragedy for this family. It has now been announced that the dead girl's father is also ill, and there have been another 11 suspected cases. So here is what you need to do. On no account touch or eat an animal that has died of its own volition. They are to be carefully buried immediately. For one child, it is too late. But if you have been in contact with an animal of this kind and have flu-like symptoms, then please do be cautious and seek medical attention.
Debt is a word that strikes fear into anyone who's ever had to wrestle with it. Being in debt is akin to being an addict. Every decision that you make must be weighed, and your relationship with debt can often affect almost every single decision in your life. And this can bring a huge amount of stress, often ending up by entering the debt spiral, a never-ending journey, heading forever downward into a life that you have no control over. It can be all-consuming. And now Cambodia has a very first world problem, a ballooning private debt issue. But is this ill-advised risk, or is it a sign of economic growth?
A major chunk, around 32% of private loans, were consumed by housing construction and the real estate sector. And while there are concerns over the high ratio of private debt within the kingdom compared to other countries in the region, some industry leaders believe that it is still at a manageable level. But private debt is going up. But is it under control, or is urgent action required to rein it in? Well, there are some truly frightening numbers involved, as there has been a rise that now stands at 180% of the nation's GDP, and that is according to the National Bank of Cambodia's 2022 annual report. The private sector loans reached over $56 billion, increasing by an incredible 20% on year 2021. And high-risk microfinance institutions touched nearly $10 billion in loans. So here is the takeaway so far. You need to loan money to allow people to enter the business arena, but lend foolishly and you can get the economy into a world of pain. And there's a gentleman named Alistair Scott, and he's the head of the International Monetary Fund mission. And he has expressed very serious concerns over the rising private debt. He noted that restructured loans of private borrowers have gone up 13% of GDP. Now, let me explain what that means. That means that 13% of people are struggling really hard to pay their loans. And what he also noticed, that non-performing loans, known as NPLs, have risen to 4.5% of GDP. Now, what an NPL is a loan that has been completely written off because there's no chance of ever recovering the money. So it all comes down to how diligent lenders have been in lending money. And that will not be revealed until there's an economic slowdown. And when the tide washes out, it will expose the jagged rocks of bad debt that are currently hidden under the waters of a booming economy. Now, here's a quick tip from myself. If you want to strike fear into your bank manager's heart and you're thinking of saving with a particular bank, ask them to look at their financial reports and look very closely at their NPLs. For it is that tells you how wisely have they been investing your money.
A few weeks ago, we reported on Sihanoukville and how its skyline is blighted with a forest of high-rise concrete buildings that are empty and abandoned. Well, now the local government is saying that they will take control and they will inject life into these abandoned buildings. But that would be a whole load of life to inject, as there are hundreds of abandoned buildings within Sihanoukville, and they have a huge task ahead of them. The financial challenge alone is monumentally big. One developer I spoke to said that the empty concrete frames of the buildings account for only 20% of the build cost, as it is the finishing, like the tiles, the plumbing and the wiring, that consume the vast percentage of a building's budget. And here's one more fact to give you an idea as to how big this problem is. Sihanoukville has 1,006 high-rise buildings. Of those, a staggering 359 of them are unfinished and abandoned.
The Premier Sihanouk governor said Sihanoukville has 1,006 high-rise buildings, of which 359 were unfinished and abandoned. He said, many construction projects were suspended in Sihanoukville in the last 3 years due to the COVID-19 outbreak. The lockdown led for many investors to stop their investments as work could not go on. The deputy Priya Sihanouk governor himself added a very interesting angle, saying that the crackdown on illegal gambling had also led to the construction of some building projects being suspended or abandoned. He said that there were investors who had financed casino building projects but dropped their projects due to fears of crackdowns on illegal activities by local authorities. Legitimate investors, though, he said, have returned and resumed their construction projects within a few months. A spokesman added that abandoned projects in Sihanoukville had become a concern to the Prime Minister himself, who has instructed the Minister of Economy and Finance to fix this issue. As often, there can be a confusing web of companies and of owners that create a blizzard of paperwork and contracts that make it impossible to be able to know who is exactly responsible for what. And with over 35% of the buildings unfinished and abandoned, that is an army of ghost buildings that are decaying. And it will take hundreds of millions of investment dollars to complete. And that is a building task that even the mighty builders of the Khmer Empire may well have winced away from.
The kingdom has reached yet another milestone as it revitalizes not only its economy, but equally as important, its standing amongst the global markets. This week, Cambodia was removed from the money laundering and terror financing grey list, and this means an awful lot. For some, it can simply be translated into how trustworthy a country is with its financial transactions. Is that country playing fair and using a high level of integrity? As to be seen, to be fair and to be honest is imperative in the business world, as it opens up the playing field to many larger companies and investors who need to be reassured that the country they are investing in has a strong ethical policy.
The General Department of Immigration officers have confiscated millions of dollars in cash over the years. One lucky customs officer arrested 3 Chinese nationals for money laundering after he found in excess of $3.5 million in cash. And it's exactly these kinds of arrests that had tainted an entire economic system. And it's these kinds of busts that put Cambodia on the grey list. On the other side of the coin, there are 2 countries that have now been subjected to increased monitoring. They are the deeply troubled South Africa, whose finances lurch from bad to exceedingly bad to very exceedingly bad to we're going to have to come up for another expression because it's now got that bad. And also Nigeria, who has struggled with corruption as it runs so very deep through the nation's veins. But for now, Cambodia can stand in the sunlight, for it has regained its clean name and is internationally recognised for doing so. A government spokesman said, "It gives confidence to all foreign investors not to worry about the issue of money transactions going through banks and other channels." And he's absolutely right. If you want to grab big business, the Sonys, the Microsofts, the Hondas of this world, you have to be seen to be clear and transparent with all your finances. And in doing so, you will benefit the entire nation.
And this next story shows very clearly as to why the control of money laundering and shady deals benefits, and why not being on that money laundering grey list means the entire country can reap huge benefits that improves the lives of millions rather than a dodgy few. The golden word any finance minister of any country is interested in is exports. And the Khmer finance minister must have been elated when it was announced that Cambodia's exports to the EU surged by an incredible 25% to $4 billion in 2022. That is an incredible feat and a huge 25% jump in trade to one of its major partners in just one single year.
Exports to the European Union last year were worth $4 billion. And that's a jump of 25% compared to the figures of 2021, according to the Ministry of Commerce. The country itself spent $812 million on imports from this market. Now here comes the interesting bit. That has created a trade surplus of over $3 billion. So simply put, the kingdom bought in $812 million in goods, but they sold $4 billion in goods. And that is exactly how you improve a nation's finance. You sell more than you buy. So who are these countries within the EU who are feverishly buying up Cambodia's goods? Well, at number one, we have Germany. They were the largest trading partner with the EU last year, and they bought in $1.2 billion worth of goods, up by nearly 20%. And they were followed by, and you're not going to guess this one, it was Belgium at number two. They bought 731 million. Behind them, Netherlands at 596 million. And close behind them was France at $542 million. Now, a lot can be inferred from these numbers. The primary exports were garments, footwear, bags and bicycles, as is normal. But what it establishes very clearly is the quality level, because the imports to Europe are only ever increasing, which means the standard must be exceedingly high to beat out other currencies. But there's a bit of a thorn amongst the roses, because there will be a partial withdrawal of tariff preferences granted to countries under the Everything But Arms scheme, which means there won't be such a generous leeway when it comes to taxes and benefits. But I honestly feel that does not matter so much, for Cambodia has found its feet. They are selling quality goods to Europe, and Europe are hungry for more.
And now it's time to look at our sports news. Now, the briefest looks at the Premier League results, and we see that Arsenal scraped a win at Leicester City. It was a tough old game, but they just got the 3 points. The Crystal Palace drew 0-0 with Liverpool, and Tottenham, they beat Chelsea 2-0. But the biggest loss, without a doubt, is our adopted team, Nottingham Forest, got kicked so hard in the love spuds that they could be singing soprano for Jesus College, Cambridge next season, because they went down 4-0. It's time to have a look ahead and see what the weather has in store for us next week.
And here is that weather, and it's mostly benign, but it does get very scary indeed. The benign bit is the temperature will be in the around 30, 34 mark. It'll be nice and comfortable. Humidity again also comfortable, around 52. There'll be hardly any wind whatsoever, so it's all pretty good. That is until you get to the end of the week. Looking towards Sunday and onwards, it looks like, using this graphic as a chart, we're getting closer to the sun, because from Sunday onwards the sun has just got bigger. So it may well be time to call Bruce Willis and head off into the stars.
This has been the Khmer Times News. Please do subscribe and comment and stay up to date with all the breaking news by following us on both Facebook and Telegram. This has been Paolo Bonini, and that was the week that was. I'll see you next weekend for your weekly roundup.